James and this is Duet3D. So in this video we're going to be taking a look at the Duet 3. It's the latest control board from Duet3D. We're going to have a look what's in the box, the connectivity options on the board, and then also how we connect to the Duet Web Control. So let's roll the intro and get into it. Okay, so before we get started on that, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Duet3D for supplying the board. So they've actually supplied the board to me for the purpose of my iDEX 3D printer build. So we're going to be able to show off some of the features of the Duet firmware, or the RepRap firmware, in terms of controlling those independent extruders. Later down the line I would also like to implement a fully automatic bed leveling routine. So we have lead screws on at least three sides of the bed. But for today we're just going to have a brief overview of the board itself. We'll talk briefly about how we connect to the Duet Web Control, because there's a couple of options for how to do that. So yeah, let's have a look. Okay, so let's have a look what's inside the box when you receive it. So it came basically with a shipping label on top and then just sellotaped up, and this is a pretty sturdy box, so it's really well shipped basically. So first thing that we see is that the board itself and everything inside is really well protected. It's got foam all the way around, so that's really nice. So let's have a look at what we've got. So the first thing that I pulled out when I received the board was the ribbon cable. And it might not immediately jump out what this is for, but we'll talk about how we use the board and the connectivity options we've got. And that's really nice that they've included this, because I had actually purchased a ribbon cable and some connectors to do what this cable is going to do, but I stupidly bought two connectors this size, which is 26 pin, thinking that, well, I'm only going to use 26 pins, so why get a larger one? So that will become clear in a second. So that's the first thing you get, is the ribbon cable. Now the really cool thing about the Duet boards is that they give you all of the connectors for the connectors they use on the board. So if we think about some of the lower cost control boards now, particularly if you're upgrading from a ramps board which used DuPont pins or DuPont connectors, some of the cheaper boards are using the JST type connectors, and they don't give you any of those connectors. So you've either got to use the wrong ones or buy them yourself. Duet, they give you them in the box. So we've got Duet 3 main board connector kit, and then we've also got a packet of the smaller connectors. So these are maybe they couldn't fit them in the bag, or this is like a whole 100 piece kit that they've obviously bought and just put in the box. So that's really good to see that they've included those. The next thing we've got here is just the business card, basically, with a QR code that will take you straight to the documentation that you need to get going. And then I've just attached to this, so I don't lose it, a micro SD card that came in the box. So we'll talk about what that's for in a second. Most importantly, obviously, the Duet 3 powered by Duet 3 sticker, so that you can proudly display that on your printer, which we will do when we get to that stage. So then we've actually got the board itself. So it's, again, really well packaged, bubble wrap around the board, and then we've got the foam on the bottom as well. So let's get that out of the way. So yeah, so this is the board itself. I will move the camera in a second and we'll get some closer shot. I know it's a bit difficult to move it around, but yeah, so that's the Duet 3 board. So let me reposition the camera and we can have a closer look at the actual board itself. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the Duet 3 board itself. So the first one we'll look at is this connector up here. So this connector is our power input connector and our heated bed power output connector. So the first connectors we've got here are the power input connectors. So these are, so this accepts minimum of 12 volts up to a maximum of 36 volts, and it's recommended to use 24. So that's what we'll be doing in the iDEX build. The next two power connectors along, so they allow you to connect a separate power supply for your heated bed. So you may be using, so instead of having 24 volts input, you might have 12, and your bed might be 24 volt. So you can hook up a 24 volt supply to here, and then these last two connectors are the actual heated bed connector. So that would be where you connect direct to your heated bed, and both your power input and your heated bed output are fused with a 15 amp blade fuse. So that's the power input, and they're nice screw terminal connectors, rated appropriately for the power that we'll be supplying. So let's have a look over here. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 connectors here are our TMC drivers, and these are 5160 drivers. Obviously they have the stall guard, microstepping interpolation up to 256 microsteps, 4.5 amps RMS with a peak of 6.3 amps. So they're really beefy connectors and really high spec drivers. So as well as the Duet board, you think about 3D printers. These are also now being used in CNC machines, laser cutters, which obviously will have bigger stepper motors. So that's why we've got that TMC driver that's going to give us a lot of overhead. So that's again really nice spec for the board. So if we jump over to this side, we've got this connector here. So this is I believe an RJ11 connector, and this is used to connect to expansion boards. So the Duet has 6 stepper drivers on board, but it actually allows you to control, I believe, up to 24 using this. It's called an CAN FD bus, and it uses twisted pair RJ11 connectors. So it's the sort of cable you get with an ADSL modem. So that's that's the connection you would use for that. So here is the processor of the board. So it's an ARM Cortex M7. It's a 300 megahertz processor, 32-bit processor. And this connector here is a high-speed bus, and this is one of the really clever features of the Duet 3. So this actually allows us to connect a SBC, or a single board computer. So we'll be using a Raspberry Pi, and what this will actually allow us to do is take the processing drawer away from the Duet board for the web control and the web interface, and put that onto the the Raspberry Pi, because you'll notice that this board doesn't have a Wi-Fi connection. It just has an Ethernet connection. So for me out here in the Hack Shack, I don't have Ethernet cables run, I only rely on the Wi-Fi connection. Now I've got a Wi-Fi booster, so I've got a pretty good Wi-Fi connection out here, but no cables run. So that is where our ribbon cable comes in. So we plug our 26 pin connector into this end, and then the 40 pin connector will go to our Raspberry Pi. Now the reason when I bought the 26 pin connector for both ends, you can't actually plug a 26 pin connector into the Raspberry Pi because the casing around the connector won't allow you to do it. So I'm really happy that this was included with the board. So yeah, we'll go through that in a second, actually connecting the Raspberry Pi. So if we then move down here, these connectors are input and output connectors. So there's a total of 9 I/O ports, and they're for things like end stops, probes, filament detection, and some other types of sensors we can use. When you set up the firmware in the web control software, or sorry, the configuration website, you tell it what output you're going to use for a specific end stop. So you're not limited to certain ones. You can plug anything into them and then tell it what you're going to do. So that's really cool. So obviously I briefly touched on the Ethernet connection, so that's down here. Now if you have got an Ethernet connection to where you're going to be plugging this in, you don't need a Raspberry Pi. You can actually run this in a second mode, which is called Standalone mode. So you would put your micro SD card in on the board and use it as you do the other Duet boards. So your configuration and the web control part of it goes on the SD card. You then cable up via the Ethernet port, and you would use it as normal. So you don't have to have a Raspberry Pi. You can use it as standalone. So the next connection we've got here is our Thermistor connection, and we can actually connect over here. We can connect to PT1000 thermistors. So you would need an extra board for that, but you have got that option. So you've got thermistors and the PT1000 connecting over here. The next thing we've got is fan connectors, PWN connectors I should say. So what we can actually connect here are 6 fans, and then we've got our heaters here. So a feature I really like is if you're supplying 24 volts, but you say you're upgrading your board, or upgrading your printer, but you want to keep your 12 volt fans. You might have bought Noctua fans or other types of fan which are 12 volt. There's actually, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little header here and here which allow you to select either the VIN voltage, which would be 24 volts, or you can select 12 volts. So the board will actually produce the 12 volts and you can then direct that to the pins. So I thought that was a really cool feature. So you don't have to upgrade all of the fans as well. You can use your 12 volt fans. And then over here is our heater connections. So you can immediately see how much beefier these connectors are. So the same pitch as the stepper driver connectors. So they're obviously going to be up to the job of holding our heater for our hot ends. So we'll obviously be using 2 of these with our bed over here. So that's those connectors, and then over here we've actually got a permanent power connector. So we can just, if we want to have a fan on all the time, maybe one that's controlling the board itself, we can do that. So that's the main connectors, and then we've also additionally got some options for LEDs. yeah, so we've basically got a lot of connectors. So we've got a set of header pins here, which is what selects how the Raspberry Pi is connected, or sorry, how the Raspberry Pi is powered. So we can either power the Raspberry Pi from the Duet, we can allow the Pi to supply 5-volt power to the board. So yeah, there are two options basically. These headers control the internal 5 volts, and then additionally how that 5 volts is then distributed across the board. So yeah, that's just a brief overview of the Duet 3 board itself. So now what I'm going to do is show you how you would connect a Raspberry Pi and configure that as your Duet Web Control. So yeah, let's take a look. Okay, so how do you connect Raspberry Pi to the Duet 3? So as you can see here, I've got this print that I got off My Mini Factory, which is basically a development platform. Allows you to set these up so it's easier to connect things. So I thought it'd be really good to show you exactly how you do it. So as I said before, this is the high-speed bus connection over here, which is a 26 pin connector. So with the ribbon cable that's supplied, you literally connect the 26 pin side to the Duet 3, and then the 40 pin side to the Raspberry Pi. So this has to be a Raspberry Pi 3. I think Raspberry Pi 3B is the minimum, and then I think you can use a Raspberry Pi 4 as well. So basically, as long as you make sure you get your orientation of your cable correct, which is the red stripe, so we'll call that pin 1, is connected near the CAN bus port, and then to pin 1 on the Raspberry Pi. And that is all you need to do in terms of wiring, as well as remembering to set the jumpers in the middle here. So basically these 3 jumpers here, as I spoke about earlier, you have your top jumper, which is the jumper that selects to activate the internal 5 volt. The next one down sends 5 volts to the Raspberry Pi, and then the one below that would be to power the Pi, which then provides 5 volts to the Duet. So I've got it configured so that I supply power to the Duet, and that supplies power to the Raspberry Pi. So that's how you connect it. To get the software we need onto the Raspberry Pi, super simple. If you've ever set up an Octoprint installation, it's basically the same. You download the appropriate image. Now Duet has 2 images. They have the Duet Lite, which is for having no screens attached to the Raspberry Pi or the Duet, and you basically use a phone or a tablet as your screen, which is what I'm doing. The other option is to have the GUI built into the image. So you download the appropriate image, you then basically burn that onto an SD card through, there's a few different options. I personally use Win32 Disk Imager. I've always used that for any Raspberry Pi stuff or burning images to things, and it works perfectly fine for me. Once you've burnt that image onto there, the only thing you need to do is to set up your Wi-Fi credentials onto the SD card. So if you open the SD card, there's a file that is WPA supplicant config, I think, something like that. You literally put in your Wi-Fi SSID and your password, make sure it's saved and updated, and that is it. Pop the SD card into the Raspberry Pi, so that's just over here. Power it up. Now the first boot will take a little while because it has to basically unpack some files and basically use the information you've given it. Once that is done, you can then, as you can see here, I've powered it. I'm powering it literally from a wall socket, a USB socket, going into the Duet 3. So I've got no other internal power and nothing else connected at the moment. And then what you would do is from a web browser, so I'm just going to slightly zoom out a bit. So as you can see, I have got the web interface on my tablet from this setup. So I already knew the IP address of the Raspberry Pi because I've used that for Octoprint. So I just punched that in to the web browser and I'm ready to go. So this is exactly what you would have if you were using any of the other Duet boards. What I'm just going to do to make it a little bit easier is turn on the dark theme for the control. There we go. And that is basically how you would then continue to set up your Duet 3 for your printer. So we won't go into anything to do with the firmware right now, but if you have got your firmware, you can upload it to the Duet through this as you would normally do for other Duet boards, and you are ready to go basically. So the web interface has all your normal commands set up now to continue with the rest of your configuration. So there you have it, just a really brief overview of the Duet 3, the latest control board from Duet3D. It's super simple to set up, it's really professionally well made, and I'm really looking forward to getting this put into the iDEX printer once it's built, and I can really show you some of the features of the board itself. If you've got any questions, please put them down in the comments. And also if you're watching this video to the end, thank you to all of the recent subscribers that I've got. Thank you to all of the subscribers I had before that as well. I'm really trying to put a bit of effort into making videos and doing projects. So hopefully we're going to keep growing the channel, and there'll be even better things to come later down the line. So thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on making.